Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 394, and today's guest is Brian Stempeck, CEO and co-founder of Evertune. Think about how people search for things on the web now and Gen AI's massive impact. A lot of people just go straight to different platforms like ChatGPT with the goal of just getting the answer to what they are searching for versus having to go to Google to then find search results and then go to a website to find the details. This evolution matters, and it matters a lot, especially if you're a brand or a publisher. In the past, you had to previously worry about SEO to hopefully rank high in Google search results. Now the rules have changed and companies are trying to figure out what to do. Is your brand getting mentioned in the LLMs? If yes, well, what is being said? And if you ask multiple times, how does the response vary from the LLMs versus the consistency of what you used to find from search results that you get from Google? It's a wild, wild west, and this was the void that Brian recognized and led him down the path of starting Evertune, which helps companies build its brand presence for visibility in AI search. It's a category called GEO, that being Generative Engine Optimization. The company recently announced a $15 million Series A round of funding led by Felicis Ventures, including returning investors, ENIAC Ventures, Nextview Ventures, Roger Ehrenberg, and others. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like a discussion around the shift in consumer behavior and how they are looking for information in the world of Gen AI, Brian's background in getting his career started as a journalist and then working in consulting at Bain after business school, how he got involved in the trade desk as employee number 8, even without ad tech or sales experience, the full lifecycle story of the trade desk to an IPO in 2016 and how they differentiate from the competition, how Brian's role evolved through the years at the company and how he gained a board seat, his biggest lessons learned from his experience at the trade desk, the background story of Evertune and what led him and his co-founders down the path of starting the company, all the details of Evertune and how they are helping brands and agencies, advice for building out your go-to-market strategy, and a key piece of advice for hiring salespeople, and so much more. Okay, quick side note. Did you know you can watch our podcast interviews on YouTube? Head over to youtube.com/VentureFizz to access our channel, and from there, you'll find a library of content, including a podcast playlist. While you are there, please make sure that you click on the subscribe button. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Brian. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, we've got a lot to talk about. You've been involved with some great companies, the Trade Desk, which we're going to talk about. But your current company is solving a very critical problem that I think about because I run a website called VentureFizz, which we publish a lot of content. So there's this whole world that is changing, and that is Gen AI and how that relates to e-commerce sites, publishers. I mean, it just affects search. So since your company's working on this problem, and we're going to get into your company, I thought it'd be good just to kind of set the stage on what is happening. Because when I look at my analytics now, it's just a lot different. So what is going on in the world of search as relates to ChatGPT, Gemini, and all the others?
Yeah, I think it's a great observation. What I think about a lot is just what is the average person doing? What is the average consumer doing? And I think a couple of years ago when we saw ChatGPT became one of the fastest downloaded apps of all time, like faster than Instagram, faster than TikTok. To me, that was the tipping point of consumer behavior is changing and they're looking for a new way to find information, which is one of the biggest shifts we've seen. I think since Google emerged in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And to me, it's also kind of funny when I think back of when I first used the internet in the 90s, like most people, it was America Online, right? You're on this centralized platform. It's your hub for the entire internet. And then we went through a period of fragmentation for the last 25 years, where instead of going to one big hub, you went out to all the individual sites. And now it feels like we're going in the opposite direction again, where you could kind of point to ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or Perplexity as now centralizing, again, all the things that you might do, whether it's reading an article on a publication, shopping for something, going to an e-commerce site. That world is collapsing back into one place again. And so it's this weird ebb and flow of the internet that has hit these huge after effects for businesses like yours, brands, retailers, everyone who got used to the internet being a certain way. And it's just it's changing. I imagine you're probably seeing it change the traffic on your website pretty substantially, right?
It is, yeah. Well, the report that you published a blog post about on your company's website, I thought it was shocking. And I know this is happening, but I was even still like, wow, it's that much. So there's a Bain report, 80% of consumers now use AI summaries for half of searches. Like, that's a massive number. That's disruptive.
It's hugely disruptive. And I think to unpack that, what I think is happening is you've got early adopters and kind of people who use technology who are downloading ChatGPT and Claude and Perplexity and Gemini and those types of tools. That's one part of it. And they also have consumers who might not even know about those tools, but they're using Google and they're using the AI overview or AI mode and they're getting the answer to the question. And it's funny because that's existed for a long time. Like 5 years ago, if you would go to Google and say, how many ounces are in a cup, which is something I've asked Google 150 times because I can never remember. It doesn't take you to a site anymore. It just tells you the answer for the very factual based questions. But because of the competitions Google's facing from the LLMs and the different AI chatbots, they've had to put more and more information into that. And so it's kind of this race to the answer where the consumer is saying, of course, like if I can just ask a question, get the answer right there, and not have to go poke around a bunch of different websites to find the answer, then that's the better experience for them. But it has huge after effects for a company like yours. If you're a publisher putting out great content, you're training the AI model, but how are you getting paid for that, right? Like there's some pretty existential questions for, I think, big portions of the internet right now.
There is. And, so there's so much opportunity for companies like yours, Evertune, of how, and we're going to talk about what Evertune's doing because obviously it's very important. But so I had the two of the founders of a company called Tollbit that were on the podcast, and they are actually that gatekeeper of content meets Gen AI, and they're going to hopefully gate and get paid the publishers because they do count on that. Like our business model doesn't really count on that, but if I was running Fortune magazine or something, I would want to know that they're not just pulling my summary. So anyways, that's a good episode to listen to if people are curious about kind of that monetization piece and how Gen AI is affecting that. But all right, let's get into your background story. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
I grew up in the suburbs of Boston, a town called Reading, about 10 miles north of the city. Grew up in a family of four boys. I was the oldest, so it was complete mayhem in our household.
So
My
you got to beat
mom,
on the others.
yeah, we didn't beat on each other's too bad, but it was four boys within 7 years. And so people are always like, your poor mother had to deal with that, and she did. But we grew up in a house that was right bordering a kind of a swamp and a marsh in the backyard. So we'd be playing in the treehouse, playing a lot of sports. It was a pretty active lifestyle growing up.
And how'd you end up at University of Virginia?
I got really tired of the cold during my high school years in Boston were some of the worst winters in the past few decades there. And so there was a winter where they had, I don't know, 100 something inches of snow. And I was like, I got to get out of here. So I applied to all Southern schools like UVA, UNC, Tulane. I wanted to see a different part of the world than Boston. When I got into UVA, it's such a great school. And I had a family member who had gone there. And when you go to that campus, it's magical. It's like just
Oh,
an
it's beautiful.
intoxicating, like the grounds there. And so when I got in, it was kind of a no-brainer. Although it was a big change from growing up in Boston. Most of the schools from Virginia, there's a lot of people from the South who go there. So it's a different lifestyle, different environment that I was in going down there.
Yeah, beautiful campus. And it was like, it's uncommon. Now it's way more common. Like I see a lot of my friends' kids are
Yeah.
going to University of South Carolina and Clemson and Alabama. So it's more common for the kids up in the Northeast to travel down south. But all right, so how'd you get your career started? Because you were an English major.
I was an English major, yeah. Not the most economic choice, maybe of most valuable majors, but I wanted to be a writer, and so I grew up in Boston. I worked for Boston Magazine during the summers in college, and I was working as a reporter for them. I came out, worked for a newspaper in Kentucky for a little while, and then I found this job for a news service, basically a trade publication in DC, where I worked on Capitol Hill, and this publication is now part of Politico. Basically, what it would cover is called Environment and Energy Daily. And we would cover like deep policy coverage about what was happening on Capitol Hill or the EPA with climate change or coal pollution or different regulations in the energy industry. And it was a very expensive subscription only publication that lobbyists would subscribe to. It was nonpartisan, so it'd be ExxonMobil would subscribe, Greenpeace would subscribe, and we'd go to every subcommittee hearing, every Senate hearing, be walking the halls of the Capitol all day long. And so for a 22-year-old, it was an amazing first job as a reporter, learning from some of the older reporters. And you're meeting people you never expect to meet. Like, I mean, this is back in the early 2000s. So it was like, I would see Hillary Clinton was a senator at the time. John McCain was a senator at the time. So these people who were running for president and getting to spend time with them as a 22-year-old was pretty incredible.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. So over that time, you obviously learned a ton, but then you decided to go back to B school. So what triggered that decision?
I was a reporter for about 5 years, and I went into reporting because I really love writing and I was great at the communication side of it. What I realized when I got to Capitol Hill, like all the best reporters I know, and some of them are now like the White House correspondent for major newspapers and TV networks. What they were great at was not all of them were great writers. They were great at transacting in information. They were great at gossip and building these networks and picking up on, okay, this change to the bill's going to go through. This senator's going to sponsor it. I honestly wasn't that good at that stuff, right? It was like just being in that network of Capitol Hill. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall. And the other thing that happened was when I was at this news service, this was in like 2005, we launched a video platform. And so we actually launched an interview program like this, where I would interview congressmen and senators and lobbyists. We launched a new business that was more advertising supported versus subscription supported. And when I was doing that, it kind of occurred to me that I'm like, I actually like the business side of this and standing up this new venture more so than being a reporter. And so applied to business schools and decided to go back and learn all things I didn't know.
All right. So what did you learn at UNC for B school?
UNC is like a really good generalist business school. So you get all the foundations. I mean, being an English major undergrad, I didn't have that background in accounting or finance or marketing. And so you get that pretty well-rounded education. I spent a lot of time doing classes in entrepreneurship, innovation, in marketing. And at that time, again, this is 2007, 2008, I was in business school. Digital marketing was really starting to take off. This is, if you go back to then, like social media wasn't a thing yet. Facebook was just launching at this time. So the advent of it, the real upswing in digital marketing was just happening. During business school, I interned for Unilever as a brand manager on the Dove soap brand. And one of the things I did that summer was helping the rest of the company understand what are hashtags, how is the brand being mentioned, like what's happening on MySpace and Facebook. Like again, it was just super early where they're like, oh, this isn't that important, give it to the intern. But like it was that stage of digital media, digital marketing, and its advent. And that was fun for me. And that's where I think I started to understand like this is something I'm really interested in. And I could see this being a future career as I go forward.
We're going to talk again about Evertune, but it's kind of a precursor of what your company's doing, just in a different form of technology.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. So after B school, you worked at Bain. So what'd you work on there?
Bain is one of those, working at Bain or McKinsey or any of those firms is the perfect job after business school, especially if you didn't have a big business background, because you get to rotate on different projects every 3 to 6 months. And it's kind of like almost like a buffet or a sampler of like all the different roles you could have in business. So I spent 6 months doing digital marketing for a big pharma company. And then I spent a year trying to turn around a container shipping company where we got deep into operations. I would like literally put on a hard hat and some steel-toed boots and go to the port of Oakland, the port of Long Beach, and you try to figure out how can we get this crane to load more containers on a ship per hour, because that's their biggest cost center. And the fun part about it is like you walk into these industries and you know nothing, right? I didn't know anything about container shipping. And then you spend a month just trying to get to speed, interviewing people in the industry, doing the research, being on site. And you're not an expert, but you come in with this perspective of like, okay, I get the general understanding of this industry. How do I make it better? How do I make this company perform better? What can we add from the Bain point of view? And that was really helpful for me throughout my career because you start to understand that I'd have the same thing in journalism too. When you walk into a new situation, you don't know the topic area, it can feel overwhelming or daunting. But in both journalism and consulting, your job is to quickly figure out what's going on. And then how do you communicate that to either readers if you're a journalist or if you're a consultant back to the client with your recommendation? And so being able to come up to speed on new industries quickly was probably the biggest skill that I learned there. And that was super important as I've gotten into other things like advertising technology or AI, where no one really knows those industries. Those weren't long-standing incumbent things where everyone knows how it works. You had to go and figure it out. And I've always found that building that muscle of figuring things out quickly and be able to communicate about it is really just super important.
All right. The Trade Desk, publicly traded company. You were there as, from what I gathered, employee number 8.
Yes.
So this is one of the reasons why, like, lots of startups don't survive. They might not work out, but I've always been an advocate for people joining startups because of what you're going to learn regardless of the outcome of the company. But in your situation, it worked out. It was a successful endeavor that obviously grew to a point where there was a public offering and it still remains public today. So as I found it fascinating how you ended up joining this company, because employee number 8, coming from a strategy consulting background, a writer, right? It just was like, wow, like this worked out as far as a new industry.
Yeah. It was a bit of a stretch at the time. My one of my best friends, this guy Alex Schneider, he was employee number 7 at the Trade Desk. And he had started an incubator for tech companies in Ventura, California, which is about an hour north of LA. And so he was working for the city of Ventura. So he was running this incubator for tech companies, trying to create Ventura as a little bit of a tech hub. And Trade Desk was one of their first tenants. And he met Jeff, the CEO, and they kind of hit it off. So he quit his city job and went to work for them. And then he said to Jeff, he's like, hey, you guys, it was mostly engineers at that point. There's a little bit of funding, there's Jeff and Dave, the 2 co-founders, and some software engineers. Basically what happened after that is Alex was like, I think you guys should meet. You'd really get along. Brian's in New York. You're going to need to sell to brands and agencies. And so me and Jeff met. And it was kind of this meeting of like mutual distrust where I'm working at Bain. I'm doing fine, getting like a nice salary there. And this is a startup that has no real product yet or no real customers. It's early stage. And Jeff's looking at me thinking, this guy's never worked in ad tech before. He's never done ad sales. And so it was risky for both of us. But I thought just what they were doing was so cool. And it made sense that this transition of bringing power to the advertiser, the buyer, to choose what ads to buy was just a revolutionary way to think about advertising. And what I thought I would bring to the table was, this is new technology. You're going to have to communicate and explain this really clearly to brands and agencies. And that's going to take a while. This is not like super easy technology to understand. And I think that ended up being true. And so Jeff took a chance on me. I took a chance on Trade Desk. And so I started up the New York office and more of the sales and client service teams and started trying to convince people to try out Trade Desk in the very early years of 2010.
Wow, that's amazing. And Jeff obviously had a wealth of experience. Like, he had built companies before and ad tech. So this was his next turn.
That's right. He had built a company called AdECN. So he had built one of the first supply side platforms to help publishers auction off their inventory. And he exited that, sold that to Microsoft. And then when he left Microsoft, him and Dave came out and said, let's build the tools for the buy side. So let's go build all the technology that the advertiser themselves would use. So they kind of took the other side of the table.
Trade Desk is in a category of programmatic advertising. So, like, what does that mean?
So what that means is the way people used to buy ads would be, let's say you're an advertising agency, your Nike is your client, and you're buying ads for them. It used to be you'd say, okay, we want to run ads on ESPN. We're trying to reach basketball fans or tennis fans and sell them Nike products. I'll just write search an order ESPN and spend $1 million. And that seems like a good place to run ads. Let's let them figure it out from there. I'm out of the picture. Programmatic advertising took the control back to the buyer. And what happened was, if you go to ESPN today and that top banner ad or video ad on the page, that's being auctioned off in real time. So like that tenth of a second that the page is taking to load for you, that ad is being auctioned off to companies like the Trade Desk and Google and a bunch of others who represent Nike and Adidas and a bunch of other brands. And they're deciding if they want to buy that single ad impression or not. So instead of buying in bulk, you're buying ads one by one. So you're unbundling it. And what that enables Trade Desk and those companies to do is say, what do we know about this user from an anonymous basis? Is this person high income or low income? Are they really into basketball or not? Did they just buy some Nike shoes, or are they shopping actively for shoes right now? And so you have all these different data points that come from cookies and device IDs that Trade Desk and companies like that would use in their algorithm to figure out, for this one ad, for this one person on ESPN right now, we're willing to pay this price. Let's try to win that auction and buy that ad. And that auction is happening 15 million times a second all over the internet.
Wow.
So that's happening on Spotify, that's happening on Hulu, that's happening on the Wall Street Journal. And so that technology has come to power most advertising on the internet. But back then, 10, 15 years ago, it was the tiny minority. It was mostly you'd buy in bulk, you'd give the decision-making power to ESPN, and this was the rise of audience buying, data-driven buying. So programmatic was the pipes that make it all happen, but ultimately it was about giving the advertiser choice about which ads they could buy.
And this is a category that did develop rapidly, if my memory is correct, because I remember companies like DataZoo in Boston was doing something similar, if I'm right, and like Media Math. So there was these companies. I'm sure there was a whole slew of competition. Yet the Trade Desk came out as one of the winners, right?
Yeah.
So why?
There was a ton of competition. It was, I mean, with a space like this where there's close to $1 trillion spent in advertising every year. So you have the biggest TAM you could possibly imagine, right? And so when you have all this massive TAM and this change happening, you have all these companies chasing it. So that, yeah, at the time when Trade Desk launched, Google had just bought a company called Invite. So Google had this own technology themselves. There's MediaMath, there's Turn, there's AppNexus, there was DataZoo, there's really like 15 or 20 companies in the category. And so Trade Desk was somewhat late to market. That had pros and cons. The positive side of that was, because this technology is complicated, what happened was all the other companies had spent a couple of years trying to educate the market. So the market was more up to speed on what this was, what programmatic was, than they had been in 2008. The other thing that happened was that many of the early DSPs, they tried to sell to agencies, and because the technology was difficult, the agencies didn't jump on it right away. And then so they started selling directly to the brand. And when you sell to the brand, you make the agency upset, because the agency wants that relationship with the advertiser, right? So if you're Ogilvy and you're working with Coca-Cola, you don't want anyone else getting in the way of that relationship. So Trade Desk, when we started going to market, we basically came in and said, okay, the agencies need a tool set. They need technology to go buy these ads. They weren't really doing it at the time, but what we thought was, this is the future of the agency role. Like, the agency will become, and the agencies actually started to establish what they called agency trading desks, where they would use programmatic technology and start doing data-driven audience buying using tools like Trade Desk. But where we focused and what really worked was, we want to power the agencies. So let's build a self-serve tool. Let's give them all the technology that they need to run these ad campaigns. Let's build them every bell and whistle on the platform they can use. And let's not go direct to brand and start making the agency upset. Like, if a brand wants direct relationship eventually, we'll figure that out. But let's go to the power users who have all the distribution, because every agency you sign on has 100 different brands they work with, and they control most of the ad spend. And so that worked really well. The other thing was a little bit different. I'm sure you see this all the time, where this is kind of the difference between how you actually run a tech business or a VC funded business versus sometimes how VCs think about it. In like the venture capital world, I think they often think about, we're going to pump a bunch of money into a couple of companies. One of them will rapidly become the winner, and that's it. Like, kind of like the Google model, right?
Yeah.
Google dominates 89% of search, at least they did. And they were the one winner there. And we could say like Uber in like the automotive ride sharing space. Like, there's some categories where we have one clear winner. Advertising and marketing doesn't really work like that. Like, advertising agencies and brands rarely pick one technology or one publisher or one tool set and say, okay, I'm Coca-Cola. I'm going to spend $1 billion this year on ads. Let's put it all here, right? They take a diversified approach, just like you would across different investments if you're investing in stocks, right? You have a portfolio. Because of that, Trade Desk didn't race to raise $500 million and try to capture the market. It captured the market gradually over the course of a decade. And I think it's important to know is like in the ad tech space, there was a company called Rocket Fuel that did follow that approach. There was a ton of money. They went public in 2013. They had a multi-billion-dollar market cap. And so if you looked at it then, you'd be like, Trade Desk is in trouble. Rocket Fuel's going to win the category. It's all over. Rocket Fuel ended up going bankrupt a couple of years later. And
Wow.
so the lesson I took from all of that was when you're running a tech company and you're VC funded, sometimes there's this tendency to be like, spend a crazy amount of money, grow as fast as you can. And there are times when that's the right approach. But it's a long road. Trade Desk didn't become a S&P 500 company overnight. 15 years. It took 6 years to get to an IPO. Like it was a longer journey, which was based on a bunch of little decisions you get right. It wasn't go raise $200 million, hire 1,000 people and win the market. There's a more gradual approach to that. I think that's one of the things I think about a lot in our space, which is now with Evertune, it's very fast growing AI space, but it's going to be a long road. The technology is moving quickly, but this is not going to all change overnight. And so it's thinking long term, like what does our company look like in 10 years, not just next year?
So how did your role evolve from employee number 8, first hire in New York City, to working with all these brands? You know, they're all, a lot of them are in New York City, um, to an 11-year, life cycle of your career.
Yeah, so I started off just the only person in New York, just going to conferences by myself, calling up agencies, just lonely living, trying to get the first few deals in. You do that and then start having a little success. We hired a couple more salespeople, a couple client service people, started to build a bit of a business hub in New York. And the business was scaling. And about 3 years in, I think with Trade Desk, you hear a lot about Jeff, who's this incredible founder, and Dave, this visionary engineering leader. There's another person who was super instrumental in all this was this guy named Rob Purdue. And Rob was the COO of Trade Desk. And he joined, I think, in like 2013-ish, when the company was about 25 people. We were starting to have some success. But for me at the time, like I didn't know how to scale that business. Like how to go from 5 salespeople to 20. How do you manage the P&L for all this? How do you think about how many client services people to hire? Like how do you keep up with this growth, but not get over your skis where you're burning too much money? And Rob was like this perfect CEO. He had scaled another ad tech company. He had worked as an investment banker. He came in and added, he was my partner kind of growing that business of I would work more client facing and Rob was more of the COO, figuring out like, who do we hire when, how do you manage the P&L, how do you run the forecasting? We were kind of left hand, right hand on the New York business operations. He was just super instrumental in helping me learn this is how you scale a tech business to go from 20 people to 100 to 1,000. And like he was a lot of the engine of that playbook.
The company scaled to the point where it went public in 2016, right?
Yeah.
So what was that like?
It was an incredible run. I mean, those first few years were the toughest, where you're explaining the new technology, you're getting the first few clients to trust you, and then you're trying to keep those clients, get them to grow their business with you. And like that's something I think about a lot, which is it's one thing to sell in any new client, but then the more important thing is how do you keep them and how do you grow your business with that client? So Trade Desk would start where like we'd have an advertiser spending $20,000 in the platform and that in ad spend. And that in the world of big brands, that's a tiny amount of advertising spend. And so the game was, how do you take them from $20,000 to $100,000 to $1,000,000 to more? Because a brand like Coca-Cola or Nike, they have these massive budgets. And so you have the ability to do that if you can keep proving the value that you're delivering. And so a lot of it was like building out that mentality of how do we take these clients, keep growing them, keep offering more product features and doing that. The funny part about going public in 2016 was no one in the investment world liked ad tech at the time. You had a few different companies like Rocket Fuel that had gone public and had either gone bankrupt, had really rocky earnings, had not delivered. And so it was it was a difficult journey to get investors to understand here's why we're different. And ultimately, what we really had to do was just prove it. And so going public was one thing, where the company IPO'd at about $1 billion market cap in 2016. But what we knew as the management team was we have to go hit earnings every quarter. We have to go do what we said we'd do with Wall Street, and we did. But it wasn't like, I think sometimes people think of the IPO as the exit, champagne's popping, you're done.
Huh.
It's
The
not.
work just begun.
Right. For Trade Desk to go from $1 billion company in 2016 to today, they're give or take 25 billion. Right. So like that journey is a lot of hard work to like both manage the growth and hit Wall Street's expectations along the way. And like that, I think that's the part where we were really careful with the team to talk about an IPO is a great moment to celebrate. It's a good indicator of how we're doing, but it's not the end. And I think sometimes, like when you come from more the founder mentality, you're like, eh, or people think of for investors, that's can be the end, right? They now have a liquid way to sell the stock. But for the employees, this is just another marker point, right? This is another like chapter along the way of like, now we have to enter the next chapter of how to grow this company.
You served on the board for a while, right?
I did.
So how does that happen?
Yeah, in in the early years of Trade Desk, I would go to most of the board meetings because of that phase. It's the VC investors, and you're talking about strategy, and I'd go even not as a board member. And then yeah, after Rob, the COO, left the company, and he had a board slot, so I kind of took over his spot there. And so I had one of the employee seats on the board. Again, I kind of look at my career as a bunch of different learning experiences. And so to be sitting in a boardroom and like one of our board members was a guy named David Wells, and he was the former CFO of Netflix. So he helped grow Netflix to a massive business. And so we're talking about, okay, how do we manage Wall Street and how do we think about earnings this quarter and what's our messaging? You're talking to like one of the best people who's ever done this, right? And so I look at experiences like that as just, I feel super lucky to have had that.
That's a perfect segue. So what were the those key lessons learned through those interactions or just, growing the trade desk that carried over into what you're doing now?
I think one of the things that I learned from Trade Desk was how do you be very deliberate about what you're going to go chase after and what you're not going to do? Because when you get to a certain point, you've now got the money, you've got the software engineers, you've got the sales team, you can kind of build and sell all of it, but it's finding the right size charter of how much do we want to go tackle? And so, like at Trade Desk, I think we did a really good job of this, which was we did it gradually. We started by mostly buying banner ads. Then we expanded to video ads. Then we expanded to mobile ads. Then we got into streaming TV ads. We also did that internationally. So we started the US, we added UK and Germany. Then we gradually added like Singapore and Asia. And so this very deliberate growth plan of both what are you selling to clients and then who are you going after on a global basis. Because again, if you take a pure growth mentality and say, we're going to open up in 50 markets next year, you can tip the company over, right? Like it'll tip over from trying to grow too fast or doing too much at once. So you said like, I'm going to go acquire this huge other tech company and we're going to integrate it. That's a really fast way to slow down your company if you're in growth mode. Is like, okay, now you're doing a lot of post-merger integration work that can really slow you down. And so what I think about a lot is that balancing act of you're trying to have as much growth as you can, but you can't overcommit. You can't try to build too many things at once. You've got to really focus on like, what are the 3 or 4 big things we're going to nail this year that are have the most potential for us? Because where I see some other, I talk to lots of other founders and entrepreneurs. Sometimes where I see people get in trouble is when they start chasing too many, right? They're going after 10 new markets at once and they're hiring all these people and they're launching in this market and this market. And you're like, there's only so much a company can take on at a time. And so having that balancing act of like, what's the right amount of new ventures that you can take on for growth? Like I think a lot about that. And it's like this constant tension, right? Because you never know if you're getting it right. And so that's the hardest part where there are days where you're like, are we doing too much? And there are days you're like, are we doing too little? It's that Goldilocks problem.
It's hard in the early days of a company because if you have a customer that's saying, "Hey, I'll pay you to do XYZ," yet that's not the direction you're heading down, yet there's chasing revenue, shiny object syndrome, that can be a trap.
That's right. That's right. Yep. And like, and actually when I was at Bain, we talked about this a lot, which was the container shipping business we were advising. They were thinking about what are the next businesses they could get into. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what else can you sell to your existing customers and what else are your current competitors offering. As like, it's a very simple method of let's just narrow the world to like the things that are the closest in adjacencies of what are the natural things you could sell next to your clients. And I think a lot about that of it, like when we sell things to clients today, I know they're doing this in the platform. They're telling us they want to do this. That's easy. Let's go build it. I think they might also want this feature. Like, how do you just go naturally, incrementally to the next product feature set versus, hey, here's a big new thing we should bolt on that maybe they want, maybe they don't. I think the incremental approach, especially in technology where it changes so fast, I've always found is more successful there.
Let's talk about Evertune.
Yeah.
So what led you down the path of starting a company and what are you guys doing?
Yeah, I left Trade Desk in 2021. I took a couple years off. I did some nonprofit work and some advisory work. I kind of reached this point where I wanted to go operate again. And so I've kicked around different ideas with a few friends, including a couple other folks who had left Trade Desk, my two co-founders, Ed and Paul. And all of us were having the same experience, which was we were using AI tools. So we were using ChatGPT, we were using Claude and Perplexity, and we all found ourselves using them way more than Google. And so like when we were researching different products to buy of like, what's the best? I was getting a new heater for my swimming pool, right? Like super obscure thing. Like ChatGPT, it turns out, is really good at summarizing what's the best heater to buy for your pool in your backyard. And like that's not a topic area I want to spend a whole lot of time thinking about. And so AI summarizes it for me. And so Ed was doing that for buying a new car. And so all of us came to this point of view of a year and a half ago when most AI companies were talking to marketing teams, they were talking to them about efficiency or cost savings or more workflow type tools. And we took it from a different approach, which was this is going to upend marketing. So if a consumer who's researching what car to buy used to go to Car and Driver and Kelley Blue Book and all these different sites, but now they're starting that search on ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity, how does that change things? So first off, is the AI model recommending your brand or not? What competitors are they recommending? And then why is that happening? And so we started building out those tools. And what we figured out was because the AI models, a lot of people don't know this, they give a different answer every time. So if you and I went to Google and said, what's the best new SUV to buy? Google gives us both the same 10 blue links. That doesn't happen in AI. If we ask ChatGPT that question, we'll get different answers. Are intentionally varying that because they're trying to get closer and closer to the right answer. But there's a degree of change in every answer they give.
I don't think consumers know that piece.
No, they don't.
They're just used to Google is just spitting out the same 10 links, like you said. Yet, if you're using ChatGPT, you just thought, oh, this is their answer, but it's going to change. That's interesting.
It varies naturally as based on how the models work. And then now what's happening is in some of these models, they're storing your previous searches. And so they're building an understanding of your profile. And so for me, I live in New York City. And if I ask, okay, what's the best sushi restaurant nearby? I don't have to say New York. It knows that. And so it's adding that to my search without me even having to do that. And same thing with your age and other brands you've shown you are favorable towards and other things it might know about like what your profession is. The models are kind of quietly storing all that and customizing your results for you. And so that's actually very similar to what happened to advertising. When you see that ad targeted to you, that's based on all these criteria that the ad tech companies know. In AI, the same thing is starting to happen where the search results are coming back very different based on are you 60 years old or 20 years old? Are you in Iowa or New York? Like that's changing the results that people are seeing.
Right, so this is a crazy scenario for the brands, like, so because they have no insight into these LLMs and how they're positioning their brand. So what is Evertune doing to solve that?
So the first thing we solve is answering a very simple question, which is if someone goes to look for the best SUV, is your brand being recommended? So is Toyota being recommended when somebody asks that general topic area to ChatGPT and to Gemini and to Meta's AI model and to Perplexity and DeepSeek and all the rest. And so we've plugged into every single AI model, and then we ask thousands of questions. So, and we ask things like, what's the best SUV? What's the most reliable SUV? Which one's the best value for the money? We ask a whole bank of about 150 different questions. And then we see what answers come back. And because we're asking these questions at scale, we get past the randomness probability problem. We can see, all right, we asked 100,000 questions in this report. What did overall Toyota's being recommended 85% of the time? They're doing great. The Honda CRV is only being recommended 42% of the time. They're not doing great. And some Mitsubishi SUV is only being recommended 8% of the time. And so the starting point is, are you in the consideration set? It's very similar, like if you were on Google, are you in that first page of results? Are you in the first 10 blue links? So we think about that side of things. But then we go a click deeper, which is trying to understand why is the model doing that? Because the models have different points of view. So ChatGPT might love Honda and Gemini loves Toyota. And they'll actually recommend different brands at different volumes. And so we try to figure out, well, why does it think that? And so we unpack what aspects of this product or this brand does the model like or not know about. And so it could be in automotive, it could be something like safety or fuel economy. And so it might be that Gemini, the AI model for Google, thinks that Honda's fuel economy trails the rest of its competitors. And so they give them low marks on that. And when they give them low marks on all these different attributes, they tend to give them low marks as a company overall. And so then if you're Honda, like what we found when we first started talking to clients about this was the insights are interesting of, am I showing up in AI or not? And like, why am I showing up? But that's not enough. If I'm a brand or an agency, I want to know what I can do about it. And so the next step is we give a brand a playbook to say, here are the websites that AI is learning from. So when Gemini was learning about fuel economy for the Honda CRV SUV, it learned from these sites. And so it was from Car and Driver. It was from this blog. It's from this YouTube influencer who posts a lot about cars. These are the places that it's learning from. And so
And
we
these
need
are
to
the
think about
links. So if I do a Google search, it'll provide the little sidebar now of where
yes,
that's what that is. Okay.
that's right. So we aggregate all that. And so and again, that's can be somewhat random because everyone's getting a different result. But when we run 100,000 different prompts to the models, we can aggregate that across every model and say, okay, ChatGPT is learning a lot from Reddit. Gemini is learning a lot from YouTube, and on the list. Like in many cases, we'll see 6,000 to 8,000 different sites that are being cited, some a lot more than others. And so then we say to the brand, if you want to influence the AI model, you have to influence where it's learning from. And here are the websites where it's learning from. Some of these you need to go do PR and get an earned placement there. Others might be affiliate sites where you can pay for a promoted post. Others, these are content creators on Reddit or on YouTube or on Instagram where you may be able to buy a post, maybe you can't. But we start to give them, here's the playbook for if you want to influence the websites that train AI, these are the places to focus. And then we actually give them the message. So we'll say to Honda, okay, you're seen as negative on fuel economy. Sometimes that might be accurate, where maybe that is a weakness for your brand. I'm just making this up. I have no idea if Honda CRV is good at fuel economy or not. But if it's a weakness, what counterpoint or counter message do you have? Or if it's wrong, and sometimes the models don't have recent or correct information, how do you correct that? Because sometimes the models we'll see are using outdated information that they've been trained on, or in other areas, like we do a lot of work in B2B. A lot of like B2B type categories, the models actually don't have a lot of information. And so they don't know the answer. And so then it's a matter of, can you as a brand, even just on your own website, provide that information for the first time? So an example would be, like we work with a B2B company, they have a bunch of white papers about their industry that sit behind a login. AI model can't read that. Can you make those white papers readable for AI? Like that's step one. We work with a lot of brands where step one is they say, hey, how come our brand.com website isn't showing up as a source for AI? Why is AI not reading our site? And we look at their site and say, well, you're blocking the AI crawlers. So you're actually not letting AI read your site. Turn that off. Let ChatGPT crawl and read your site so it knows you want it to know as much about your brand as possible.
All right. Maybe I should know the answer to this question, but I don't. And I've got the perfect person to ask. So with Google in the past, you would have, the map of your site and you'd submit it to Google Search Console, whatever it's called now, and they would know this is your site map and this is how your site's structured, and yes, we're going to index it. Um, am I able to do that with these Gen AI? Because I don't think I can, or there's a place to do that. And if there is, I'd like to know. And then two, how much is, because with the whole content strategy, that was big on SEO and, the HubSpot way of doing things and inbound marketing. So that's a two-part question. One, the sitemap stuff. Two, content.
Yeah. So on the sitemap side, the main thing is there's a thing called a robots.txt file that is basically a flag for the crawlers to say, can you crawl this site or not? So there's mechanisms like that to say to the Perplexity crawler or the ChatGPT crawler or other AI bots, come be allowed to read the site or block the site. And so step one is making sure that you're publishing a file to say to the crawlers themselves, it's okay to come read the site, read the entire thing. If you're a brand, that's what you want to do. Publishers is a different story, right? Publishers, you may not want to share your content because you want to get paid for it. You want a licensing deal. You want to develop your own terms with the LLM. So there's that.
But is that just like an honor system though? Like, because they could still read your site even though you have that in that file.
They could. Most of them seem to adhere to it. In some cases, you see that they don't. And so there's been a number of famous examples of this where I know Reddit, I think, is suing Anthropic for using their content without paying for it, whereas OpenAI and Gemini both pay Reddit to license all their content. And so this is starting to play out across some of the litigation that's happening in this space. But there's not, to your point, like on Google, to my knowledge at least, there's not like a great way to go engage with these AI companies directly and publish things to them. Like that's something we thought about building. We're getting more brands interested in saying, can you help us pass more brand verified data directly to the AI models? So that's one of the things we're speccing out as something we could potentially build. But it may be that the AI companies just want to crawl the site and gather everything they can. On the content side, this is absolutely the way to influence the AI model, which is, I think one difference is that sometimes in the SEO world, it was very focused on your own site and your own content. And that's part of the story here, which is, if back to Honda, if there's not a lot of information about fuel economy or fuel efficiency on your site and the exact specs that you get 35 miles per gallon or the new hybrid gets 40 miles per gallon, you want to put out as much information as possible on your own site and get that into the models. That's a kind of a basic step one. And that's where a lot of brands we work with start, which is we help them identify for these topic areas, for these brands, go push this information on your site, put out some blog posts, put out some articles, we'll help you do it. And we actually help them generate content to do that. But that's not enough. I think the difference here with AI is that AI is not just learning from your site, it's learning from the rest of the internet. And so when we give this list of sources, when we say, it's this subreddit, it's this YouTube content creator, it's this endemic publication, it's this blog, and give that full list, like we know where the AI models are learning from. And this isn't as simple as, I think sometimes in our space, in this emerging AI search GEO space, you hear some companies say, well, just publish a single post to Reddit or a blog post and you'll double your results overnight with the AI model. It's not that simple. It takes real marketing. Like it takes a real marketing approach to say, like we have a software company we work with. We figured out for them that security was the main issue that the models either didn't know a lot about or giving them low marks on. And so we helped them build some content for their site. They put out 4 or 5 articles about how secure their platform was and the verifications they had and things like that. And then they went off and did PR. So they found 4 publications in the list we gave them. They published articles with those. They worked with those reporters. And over a course of about a 2-month, 3-month period, they went way up in the rankings of how often their software was getting recommended because they were seen as better on security, which they were. They were good at security. They just weren't getting credit for it. And so the models are movable, but I would say they're not hackable. And I think that's the difference is like there's a lot of noise in our space right now about, oh, this one little trick will get ChatGPT. Maybe this week, but these models are pretty advanced. Like they're going to sort that out. And so what we focus on over time, again, when I think about the long-term vision, what we think about is if you're a brand, AI models are a new audience for you. You're trying to reach consumers with a big part of what you do. You're trying to reach Google and its crawlers and traditional search with parts of what you do in traditional SEO. And now you have this new constituent, the AI models from all these major companies who learn in a slightly different way. But if these companies are now the ones influencing the consumer, which I think they will continue to be, they become super important that they know as much as possible about your brand and that you're focused on how to influence them. And so for us, what we think that means is this is about PR. We do a lot of partnerships with PR agencies, communications, publishing content on your site, social media, influencers, content creators, community building. There's a lot of traditional digital marketing aspects that go into this, but this isn't one blog post and you change your rankings overnight.
But let's take this podcast as an example. Are these models still super hungry for a thing like a transcript?
Yes.
Or is it able to, because you say like YouTube creators and like, the audio version of this podcast, is it able to absorb that yet from a technical point of view? Or is it, hey, you probably should still have your transcript because that's where it's going to really feed on the content?
We're seeing both. We're seeing cases where the models are now consuming video and audio data as part of that, but the transcript is the no-brainer. So like across different models, and that's the simplest way where with a lot of the YouTube content, we're seeing it enter the model through a transcript. And so then it becomes a matter of like, okay, if this podcast is on Spotify, is that crawlable by the AI model or not? Have they done a deal? But in general, yeah, we have a lot of brands we work with taking a lot of their audio visual content and translating that into transcripts it's really simple stuff, but like we have some brands where they might have an infographic on their site that is showing them versus competitors, but it's not very readable by a language model. And so can you take that image and translate it into text? Over time, will you need that forever? Probably not. But for the short term, when in doubt, translate into text is a good call.
All right. So you raised a Series A. So congratulations.
Thanks.
So talk about the funding and looking ahead. What's next?
Yeah. So we raised our seed round in October of last year and came out of beta at the beginning of 2025, started selling to clients, and the reaction was just unbelievable. And I have to contrast a little bit with like Trade Desk, where Trade Desk was like a long sales process to explain that technology and gradually get people to move over. It took a long time. Programmatic was it took over the course of like a decade, but it wasn't overnight. This is happening more overnight in the AI search space, where we even just get inbound leads from major Fortune 500 brands who are seeing this happen and that doesn't happen like as a salesperson.
Right. You're like, huh? Like, wait. Let's stick with Honda. Honda just reached out to us.
Yeah, I say to our sales team now, I'm like, it's not always like this. This is a nice problem to have. But we get inbounds because every brand on the planet, I think, as a consumer, people understand. If you're the CMO of Coca-Cola and you're now using ChatGPT about different product categories, you're of course thinking, what is it saying about Diet Coke to consumers? What is it saying about Sprite? And so I think because of that consumer usage, every marketer on the planet is thinking about this problem right now. And we have brands who come to us saying, will we need a website in 3 years? Or will mostly people learn from the AI model? And I think that's extreme, but that is kind of the direction that things are heading, where marketers are thinking very deeply about what does this mean for the future of their business, the AI model as a constituent. And so what's interesting in this space too is that we see a lot of CMOs engaged. a lot of VPs of marketing versus just like the SEO person or the analytics person. This is coming from the board and the management team of it's a macro level trend happening that is going to affect a lot of parts of their business, including how consumers learn about their product, their brand.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's just it's crazy how quick things have just been flipped up on its head. It's absolutely fascinating.
So
So
yeah, we raised this Series A one to go faster because the opportunity is here. But also like when we think about this space, AI search is just the starting point where of how consumers will use a tool like ChatGPT. Like already right now, there are some agents and assistants popping up that will help you as a consumer put items from a store into your shopping cart for shopping for groceries, let's say online, if you're using like Instacart or Kroger or online ordering. And you can sort of build a shopping list in ChatGPT and have an agent go build your shopping cart for you. That's pretty wild, right? That's going from the point of category research or influence in marketing to actual purchase decision. So is the AI model now choosing which brand of cereal to put in your shopping cart? Which I think it will over the coming years. I think that feature is coming sooner. Less so, is it going to buy a car for you? No, you're probably going to be involved in that decision.
yeah,
When it comes to like which brand of cereal or salt or something at the grocery store or toothpaste, and you don't actually care that much, and you want the model to make a decision for you. Like we're also seeing this in B2B where people are using AI models to run RFPs to decide what software tool to use, and they're asking you questions. So the level of influence from AI is going up. And so we think a lot about how do you measure commerce starting to happen in AI? How do you measure agents and assistants that consumers are using, even for something as simple as grocery shopping? And then ultimately, I think where this also goes is how does advertising emerge in AI? Right now, it's not really present. These are ad-free models. They're subscription-based. Probably as they evolve, will there be an ad-supported model? I think so. And so how does a marketer think about that? Again, if we go to this world where it's more like AOL, it's more centralized on one platform, that one platform becomes massively important. So we think of ourselves as how does the chief marketing officer and their team engage with AI? And we've started with a few tools, but we see a long road ahead of all the things we can build for them.
you have this AI brand index. So I see this as your marketing tool because this is something that obviously journalists can relate to. And so I think that's a brilliant thing that you're doing from a
Thanks.
marketing point of view. Yeah, because it's just like everybody's competitive. Like, what do you mean? Sticking with Honda, Toyota's in front of us. So and then the journalist can pull the data from that brand index in their publication. So I assume that's what that was for.
That's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. I'm on the board of Nielsen, and Nielsen does this for TV viewership. And so they'll be like, okay, this month YouTube did better than Netflix, and they publish these consumption charts about where people are spending their time watching TV or streaming TV. And to your point, it's hugely influential from a press standpoint. And I think of this the same way, which is, yeah, what automotive brands, what back to school laptops for students, what are the hottest holiday gifts? And this is as AI grows in importance, I think this becomes just a really interesting data point to track like who's rising and falling in these AI rankings.
All right, go to market. You were key to building the go to market strategy for the trade desk. Obviously, you're doing it again for your own startup. So, what advice would you have for founders around a go to market approach for their company?
A couple things. One is when we hire salespeople, and this is something I learned at Trade Desk and I apply now, especially when you're selling technology. I think it's a different type of seller that you're looking for. My number one piece of advice is you want the technical seller where like a lot of what we do and we have a sales team of about 5 people. What they do every day is demos of our platform for clients. And they show them, okay, if someone's looking for a backyard barbecue grill, your Weber grills, here's your category, here's who's showing up, and we'll take you through the data. And we're going to show you everything we can do in our platform. And it's technical. It's complicated, right? Like, how do you query this AI model? Where does this data come from? Why are you doing it this way? And I've seen sellers, especially in the SaaS or the tech space, where they're more of a relationship seller. And they kind of ask the question I've heard this before in interviews. Hey, can you partner me with a sales engineer? And to me, that's the biggest red flag. Because a sales engineer is someone who's like, hey, I'm just a salesperson. I don't know the answer to that hard question. Right? Ask the sales engineer. It's like, well, why don't I just pay the sales engineer? And so
Right.
I tend to bias towards sales engineer type people because I think in a space, any emerging technology space, you're building complicated technology. It's moving really quickly. You're adding new stuff. You have to have a sales team, a client service team that deeply understand that technology and keep pace with it because it's constantly like we ship new products every week where it's like, okay, now this works this way. Now we have this feature. If you're not like a hungry, curious seller, you'll fall behind. This is not like you're doing the same pitch over. The pitch changes every week because we have new features to do. And so I think a lot about that product driven seller.
That's great advice. I've never heard that before. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, sales is hard,
Yeah.
but to just have that relationship person that's just there to hopefully land the commission and not, have to defer to a sales engineer, that's, just doubling your headcount too. So efficiency of your cost and spend there. Obviously, new funding. I assume you're hiring. So what functional areas are you hiring for?
Yeah, we're hiring salespeople. After we sell a client, then we have a client service team that teaches them how to use the platform. And I think that's also just super important, which is something that I'm a big believer in is everyone knows that salespeople get paid commission. You got to pay commission to the client service team too. Like after you close the deal, the face of the company, the client becomes the support team. And so that client service team teaching them to use the platform, that's going to be why they decide to renew with you or not, or why they decide to go. We had a client recently that went from running one brand on our platform to running like 12 brands on our platform. That wasn't really the salesperson. That was the client service person. And so we're running sales, client service, and then developers. So kind of across the board, front end, back end, data science. What's fun for hiring engineers is that this is like the space to be in. Like we're dealing with big data where we're prompting these models tens of millions of times a month. And so we're dealing with big data at scale. Like we kind of understand the inner workings of the AI models really deeply. And if you're a software developer, that's a fun challenge to go tackle. Like we're on the cutting edge of building these models.
And I love your feedback on client services because any upselling and retention, retention is so key. That's that team. So make sure you take care of your client services, customer success people. Um, there was a bunch of browsers that had search engines in the past that we don't even think of anymore. So do you think there will be like a defined one winner of a category, whether it's the ChatGPT, Perplexity, Gemini, like, the majority of searches are done through Google back in, recent memory. So do you think there'll be one defined winner eventually?
I think we're further from that in this space. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons. One is the technology is evolving so quickly where like, I mean, I remember, I can't remember the exact date. It was like 6 months ago when the DeepSeek model came out of China and everyone like lost their mind, right? Like the Nvidia stock dropped like 20%, like, and like no one, and 3 days before our CTO was like, yeah, this DeepSeek model is pretty good. And so it just happened so quickly that there's a low cost open source model that seems like it's as good as some of the big boys. You don't see that in most industries, right? Like that, I think the pace of change is just unreal. And I think for consumers, the switching costs are so low, right? So ChatGPT got to 500 million downloads faster than any company in history. But if someone offers a model that's 10 times as good as ChatGPT, they'll switch. I mean, most people are not paying for ChatGPT. And so I think we're a ways away from that. One, because of the velocity of the space, but two, because it's so strategically important. You now have Meta signing up AI engineers for $100 million, right? They're betting the farm on AI. You've got Amazon, which is a stake in Anthropic and is going big on AI. Google, for obvious reasons, it's huge for them. You've got DeepSeek and new challengers. You've got Anthropic and Claude. You've got Microsoft with its investment in OpenAI and doing some other things. Every tech company on the planet has to have an AI strategy and has to own the core technology. Like the 5 to 10 mega cap tech companies, I don't see any of them saying, I guess we'll just not be in this category. And so as a result, that's good for my business at Evertune, because I think that creates fragmentation where you see one dominant platform for this consumer use case, maybe like you're starting to see Anthropic pull away with more powering agents and more B2B type stuff. Like, will the platform specialize? I don't know. But like when you have the 10 largest market cap companies on the planet pumping as all their cash into this, I think you create a pretty wild west for the next few years. So I don't think this becomes winner take all anytime in the near future.
3 apps you can't live without can't be Slack, email, or calendar, or any Gen AI.
Oh, this is good. 3 apps I can't live without. I'm a fantasy baseball guy, so I'm gonna say Yahoo Fantasy Baseball. Although I wish they'd
Wow.
add more features to it than they.
That's a lot of work, fantasy baseball.
Yeah, I've been doing it for a long time. I'm pretty dialed in. I've got my strategies down. What can I say? I can't say Slack or email.
Calendar or Gen AI.
I'd say Google Maps. I'm always lost. Google Maps, I think, is one of the greatest things ever built. So that would be number 2. And then I I don't know. It's like I spend. This is a lame answer. This might be a lame answer. I spend a lot of time outside just doing outdoorsy stuff, and so like I pay for a bunch of like good weather apps like AccuWeather and Windy.com and like good stuff for marine forecasts. What's the wind going to be? And so like not baseline weather, but like a good hardcore weather app.
I was going to ask, what do you like to do for fun outside of work? And it sounds like you like to boat.
I get on a boat sometimes. I do. I go fly fishing a bit with friends. Try to get when I'm in the city, I'm in the city. But if I'm out of the city, I'm gonna go to do stuff outside. So try to get outside whenever I can.
Awesome. Well, Brian, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great stories behind the tech companies that you've been building, and obviously what you guys are building now with Evertune.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.